Buenos dias, and my name is Stan Mitchell, and my sincere apologies that I'm not able to join you all today in Madrid to give you the presentation Facilities Management, Many Languages, One Standard. Unexpectedly, I've been delayed and I am unable to travel, so we decided to try and present this to you remotely. So my sincere apologies. I was very much looking forward to joining you all and enjoying some time in one of my favourite countries, Spain, and some better weather than I have here in Scotland. Anyway, no more ado, I'd like to get on and give you this presentation, which hopefully you will find interesting in terms of the development that's ongoing of standards in facilities management. So the agenda, I'm going to talk a little bit about standards themselves, and more about the ISO Technical Committee 267, which is the committee responsible for facilities management. I'd then like to spend a bit of time talking to you about the management system standards, what they are, what makes them slightly different, and the importance of them to us as a facilities management community around the world. And then I'll finish off by talking a little bit about how you can contribute, because standards will be of little value if we don't have the input from all of us who work within the facilities management community. And ultimately then they'll be of little value to those of us that want to make use of them and the knowledge and guidance and support that they give. So moving on to what is a standard. Although most of you will know of ISO as a standards body, each of you in your own country has national standards bodies which develop standards locally. And indeed there is an organisation called CEN that develops standards across Europe. I'll talk about that again in a moment. But fundamentally it's not just standards bodies that create standards. We do them in our organisations, we create them within our teams, we create them for ourselves in terms of standards of work, standards of etiquette, professionalism, etc., etc. But fundamentally when I'm talking about ISO type standards, it's a document that provides guidance, requirements, specifications that can be used consistently, hopefully, in terms of delivering a service or making a product, and making sure that what we do and how we do it is fit for purpose. So let me focus a little bit on ISO TC 267. Progress to date. In 2011, we had to convince the ISO organisation that facilities management as a professional discipline was worthy of having a committee. And that in itself is not a given. ISO needs to be convinced, and the people in ISO are standards people, so they don't necessarily run businesses or organisations or deal with the overheads associated. So we had to make sure they understood the importance of the discipline, the potential value that it offers commerce and industry, and then get their agreement to establish a committee which would work on establishing standards. In doing that, the British Standards Institution in the UK, because that's where we developed the business case to create a committee, they were appointed the Secretariat. When we first started the committee, there were three initial objectives. The first one was to create a body of knowledge and expertise that was truly international in nature. And that in itself is a challenge, because different parts of the world, facilities management as a professional discipline is evolving at a different pace. So making sure that we had the broadest possible community pulled together within this committee was very, very important. The second objective was that we decided as the first work items within ISO TC 267 was to take the first two standards that were created within CEN, the European standards, and raise them up to an international level. And CEN very kindly agreed to allow this new committee to take on that piece of work. More about that later. And the third objective was to develop a diverse, experienced, cohesive technical committee where we could start to bring together the collective vision and consensus about what it is that we all are so passionate about and trying to deliver to our organisations, large and small. So those were the three objectives, and one of the aspect of that was we need to create meaningful standards, not theoretical, not educational, but standards that could be used by the practitioner in the field. You'll be the judge of whether we've succeeded in that particular objective. So moving on to the initial work items that we took on board from the CEN committee. Their formal name is ISO 18480-1 and -2. And as you can see from the screen, the first one is Facilities Management Terms and Definitions. If we have a relatively new discipline to some people in some parts of the world, it's very important that we all get the terms and definitions right. And that's the many languages part of it, because although we may, most of us at least, be able to communicate in English as an international language, what we understand from the words in English can vary tremendously, and I've certainly found that to my own experience over the years of travelling extensively around the world. So a simple word in English that might mean something to me in Scotland actually might not mean the same thing to somebody in England, believe it or not. So you get regional variations, but certainly you cannot assume that it would mean the same in the Netherlands or in Thailand or in Brazil, for example. So it is quite important to establish a baseline of the languages that we're using within our sector, within our professional discipline. The -2, the second standard, is a guidance on sourcing and the development of facilities management agreements. Now, that was an existing European standard also, but in this case they enhanced the European standard and added the strategic sourcing process. Internationally, they felt that that was appropriate and would add value to the content and the value to the practitioner of that particular standard. So those were the first two work items, and within an ISO committee, the people who are responsible for that form working groups, and they have fundamentally finished their work. Those two standards are now currently in process for voting by the ISO community, and they are also in the process of getting the translations done into some of the different languages that is part of the standard process within ISO. The work is, as I said, is done. The process is nearly complete, and very early next year you will be able to see these two standards being published. So I would recommend that you, when the time comes, that you get those standards and see what value you believe they have. So moving on, just to give you an idea, I said at the beginning that one of the objectives was around bringing in an international community to get involved in this work. And there you can see the current community that is directly engaged with ISO TC 267. So there are 32 countries now engaged. And as soon as we announced that we were about to establish a management systems standard, that increased the interest in what we're doing, because that is going to be a very, very significant standard for us as an industry and as a professional discipline. But you can see there are some parts of the world that aren't terribly represented there right now. including Latin America. So I would encourage those of you from that part of the world to get engaged. And at the end of this presentation, you'll see my email address, and please feel free to contact me if you need information, support in terms of how you go about doing that, although I will mention some aspects of that towards the end. Okay, talking about management system standards. For those of you that might not be over familiar, fundamentally within ISO there are two types of standards. There is technical standards, and they tend to be vertical standards, i.e. they are focused on a particular discipline or a particular aspect of a business or a process or a service. And you'll see the ones along the bottom of the slide, and the ones that I've highlighted to you are the two standards I've just been talking about, and also the 15221, two of those standards, which are the European standards. So they are very specific, quite narrow in terms of the scope of what they try and achieve, and that in most of the standards that you see in the ISO or the standards world tend to be technical standards. On the right hand side, in the blue, you see a management system standards, and these are treated quite differently by ISO. They don't allow management system standards to be created easily. So as a committee, we had to submit a completely different business case to justify the need to create a management system standard. And as I'm going to just highlight in a moment, management system standards, they cross boundaries in terms of disciplines and sectors and different parts of the economy within any given economic zone. And some examples are there for you to see. And the one at the bottom is 41,000, and that is the designation of the family of facilities management standards that are now going to be developed. The question mark is that at the moment we haven't delivered any, so whether it's a 1, 2 or a 3 at the end of the 41,000 remains to be seen. Time will tell. So moving on to the management system standards and the objectives that we have set out, because we did the business case, we convinced ISO this was something that was applicable across boundaries, across industries, sectors, commerce, government, etc. And the objectives that were part of that justification were listed here. So people will get into doing management system standards to create competitive advantage through improved performance, to create value through sustainable business practices, which is part and parcel of what we should all be doing day and daily, and to minimise disruption through effective risk management. We tend to focus on the positives within standards, but we should also be prepared for the negatives, and I know all of you in the facilities management world know that very well, and it's well understood. So what I'd like to do now is just give you an example around ISO 9001, which hopefully is the standard that many of you know. There are over 7 million organisations in the world today using this standard and getting benefit from it. So it's probably the one that's best well known. ISO 9001 really is all about common sense, you would say that anyway, but it's a management system that focuses on consistency and reliability. So you do what you say you do, and you do it in a consistent fashion. Specifically, it's focused on organisational processes and procedures. It's focused on the stakeholders that are involved and engaged in that process and then the output from that process, and it's focused very much on continuous improvement. So who is it for? It's for any organisation in any sector that wishes to formalise the way it operates, and that's why it crosses all the boundaries. It's for any organisation that is looking to improve the way that they manage their own processes and procedures. It's applicable to very large to very small organisations. The principles of ISO 9001 still apply. And it's for those that want to gain best advantage and return on their investment for their whole organisation and their whole business scope, including multiple locations, cross-border locations, different parts within any particular organisation or location. So, having said that, and hopefully having said it in terms of something that is familiar to you, what about ISO 41000? Who is it for? Well, my easy answer to that is, for everything that I've just said about 9001, say it about 41000. That is our intention. Our aim with the 41000 Facilities Management System Standard is to make it a default standard worldwide. It's to make it simple for organisations to understand the value add that facilities management can bring, and to make sure that it's structured in a manner that's applicable across boundaries, countries, borders, sectors, industries, government, public, private. So that's the intention. Whether we succeed at that or not is obviously going to rely on people like yourselves to get engaged. So, moving on then, how can you contribute? In the case of this management system standard, there are now two ways in which you can engage. The first way is via your national standards body. In ISO, there are over 165 national standards bodies who are members of ISO. The odds are your national standards body is one of them. To engage, it's simply you need to make sure that your national standards body has a facilities management committee. And if it has, you are entitled to be at the top table helping us deliver this management system standard. It is volunteers like you who will define, create, critique and develop this standard. It's not some guru coming from an office somewhere within ISO, it's down to folks like us. If your national standards body doesn't have a facilities management committee, go and give them a good nudge and make sure that they do, and that way you can engage. However, there's a second route in to engage if that's not feasible for one reason or another, and that's we are creating an advisory and communications group specifically for the management system standard. And I want to tell you a little bit about that just now. If you look at the graphics on the left hand side of that black bar, you see the TC, the technical committee, you see the two oval shapes. Those are the two standards I've spoken about, and then you see WG3, which is Working Group 3, and it is charged as a group to develop the general requirements, the structure, systems, performance and guidance and measurement for our management system standard. If you go through your national standards bodies committees, you can participate directly in that. However, if you look at the right hand side of the bar, you see there's a management system standard advisory and communications group, and we're establishing this to feed information out to the broader communities and to get feedback back in from the broader communities so we can inform WG3. Moving on to the graphic about how that's intended to work. If you go left from the WG3 top part of that triangle, we will feed that out through the task groups. The task groups will feed into the advisory and communications group, and we will disseminate that information to the communities that we're going to create. It will go from those communities, we will ask them to feed back, we'll filter that and we'll put that straight back into Working Group 3. So our intention is to create portals, video site, channel communications out through communities that can be created through your organisations, through your associations, through your institutes, your academia, to make sure that we engage with the broadest possible community that we can. Who are those communities? at the moment. Our thinking is around media, different sectors, supply side, client side, whatever exists in your communities, and geographically we want to spread out and communicate to every community in every part of the world. So if you can't directly engage through your national standards bodies, you can potentially engage through this communications group. So I started off this presentation many languages. Perhaps there are many languages. In my travels and my engagement with the facilities management community, we pretty well speak the same language. How we speak it, how we apply it differs, and that's why we need this standard. As those of you that know me, I come from Scotland, and the nice looking guy there on the right hand side is Robert Burns, who's the national poet of Scotland, the national bard. And Robert Burns was a man of the people, and one of his poems that he wrote was that man to man the world o'er shall brothers be for all that. And really all that is saying is we're all the same. We might speak different languages and different dialects, but fundamentally we are all the same. Hopefully we have all the same values, and certainly I adhere to that within the facilities management community. By the way, if you don't know Robert Burns' poems, you do know some of his songs, but that's another story. So thank you very much for listening. I hope it's made some sense. A very many thanks to the CIFMers, David and his team, for the opportunity, even at this late stage, to present this to you in absentia. Have a great conference. I know you will. I had the good fortune of being at the conference last year, and it was very, very impressive. So thank you for your time. I hope this makes sense. Feel free to ask the rest of the guys on the panel any questions you like about my presentation, and if they don't give you a sensible answer, let me know. Thank you very much indeed. There is my email address. I'm very, very happy to engage with any and all of you in terms of moving this very, very important initiative forward, which I believe can be the most significant thing we can do for our profession and our sector. So I look forward to hearing from you in due course. Thank you very much.